Hey everyone, ready to dive into some geopolitics today?
Yeah.
We're off to Southeast Asia, Thailand specifically.
Always a hot spot.
Yeah, they're doing this delicate dance between like two giant partners, the US and China. And everyone wants to know how they're navigating it, right? We've got the latest news and analysis, so we're going to break it down.
It's a dance that's getting trickier, wouldn't you say, as the rivalry between Washington and Beijing heats up. But here's the thing. Thailand has a history of diplomatic dexterity. They're masters at shifting alliances to fit their needs.
Right, it's like they're on a diplomatic tightrope. And just to paint the picture, imagine this. Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra welcoming both the U.S. and Chinese ambassadors back to back.
Talk about a visual, huh?
Seriously. But this isn't new for them, is it? The U.S. and Thailand, they go way back.
You're telling me. We're talking Cold War era ties, which have evolved into a formal Major Non-NATO Ally status for Thailand. And that's not just a fancy title. It equals serious military cooperation, joint exercises, access to U.S. tech, the whole nine yards. The U.S. sees Thailand as a vital part of their Indo-Pacific strategy, a counterbalance to, you guessed it, China's influence.
Right, so the U.S. wants stability in the region for security, for trade routes, it's all connected. But then there's China. They've become an economic powerhouse, particularly in Southeast Asia. That's a different kind of influence altogether.
Night and day. The U.S. might have the military might, but China, they're all about economic power. They're Thailand's biggest trading partner right now, pouring money into infrastructure and technology.
Not just writing checks either.
Nope, they're weaving themselves into the fabric of Thailand's economy, very strategically.
And they're not subtle about it. We're talking high-speed rail, huge infrastructure projects even. Wait for it, durian farms. Durian diplomacy?
Hey, you laugh, but it's strategic.
Oh, absolutely. Especially those tied to China's Belt and Road Initiative, right? This is about way more than just fruit.
Exactly. It's about the long game. China wants to reshape global trade and solidify their geopolitical clout. Every investment, every durian, it's all part of that.
So Thailand's benefiting from the U.S. on security, China on the economic front. It's a high-wire act, trying to keep both happy without, like, alienating either one. Can they pull it off? I mean, can you really stay neutral in a tug of war between superpowers?
$1 million question, isn't it? Honestly, no easy answer. Thailand's been good at this historically, navigating these waters, but this feels different, tenser.
The stakes are higher this time, aren't they? It feels like the pressure's on to pick a side. Which brings us to Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra. Her government's trying to walk that line. What's their strategy?
Well, she's definitely on that tightrope, no doubt. Her government's aiming for strong ties with both the U.S. and China, emphasizing neutrality but strategically benefiting from each. Imagine like a diplomatic ballet.
Okay, a diplomatic ballet, I'm listening. But how's that actually work on the ground?
Perfect example, her recent appearance at the ASEAN-China Summit in Vientiane. It was her chance to lay out Thailand's vision for their relationship with China. 3 key areas of cooperation she focused on.
This is good. All right, give me the rundown. What were the 3 areas?
Number 1, economic integration. And I'm not just talking about basic trade. Think optimized agreements, strengthening supply chains, focusing on things like the digital economy, green technology, all the big ones.
Smart. China loves to talk shop when it comes to those economic partnerships. What about the other 2 areas?
Her second point was all about people-to-people exchanges. Not just government officials shaking hands, but building deeper relationships, easing travel between the countries, more scholarships for students, expanding cultural programs, fostering those connections that build trust.
Makes sense. Stronger cultural ties can often smooth out the diplomatic wrinkles.
Yeah.
Okay, that's 2 down. What was the final area?
Security cooperation. Now this one's a bit trickier, given the whole U.S. factor. But she played it smart. Stressed the need to work together on shared challenges, things like transnational crime, environmental issues, even praised China's role in tackling regional environmental concerns.
Smooth move. Acknowledging China's influence without directly challenging the U.S., but still showing she's serious about working with them. That's some high-level diplomacy.
Oh, and she didn't shy away from the elephant in the room, the South China Sea disputes. Re-emphasized Thailand's stance. Any resolution has to come through peaceful diplomacy, even reference the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea.
Another careful step on that tightrope, right? Not siding with China's claims, which would upset the U.S., but not condemning them outright either. Every word carefully chosen to keep that balance.
Exactly. And this leads us to some very recent events that really highlight Thailand's balancing act, Prime Minister Paetongtarn's meetings with both the Chinese and U.S. ambassadors right there in Thailand.
All right, let's unpack those ambassador meetings. What went down? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, the meeting with the Chinese ambassador was pretty insightful. Naturally, they talked about the upcoming 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Thailand and China in 2025.
Wow, 50 years. That's a pretty big deal to keep those ties strong for that long, especially with everything changing in the world geopolitically over that time. Shows how committed Thailand is to making this balancing act work. What's planned? Big celebrations.
Oh, absolutely. A whole year of cultural exchanges, traditional music and art, all that. And get this, China's gifting Thailand a new pair of pandas, a gesture of goodwill.
Pandas. Who can resist pandas? That's some smart diplomacy for sure. But it wasn't all smiles and pandas, was it? They must have addressed the flooding in Thailand too.
Right. That's where things get really interesting. See, the ambassador confirmed that China actually reduced water releases from their dams along the Mekong River to help with the flooding in northern Thailand and Laos.
Now that's significant. China's dam projects on the Mekong have been a point of contention for years, haven't they? Downstream countries like Thailand and Laos, they've always been worried about the impact on water levels and the environment. So for China to actually reduce the flow during a flood, that's huge. It means they're willing to compromise to keep those relations strong. Did they offer any other aid?
They did, actually. China donated 7.2 million baht for flood relief.
That's a serious chunk of change. Definitely sends a message about their commitment. It's fascinating to see this play out. China's using this combo of cultural diplomacy, environmental cooperation, and straight-up economic aid. But we can't forget about the U.S. side of things. What happened when Prime Minister Paetongtarn met with the U.S. ambassador? How'd their approach compare?
Well, the U.S. ambassador, of course, congratulated her on being elected prime minister and reaffirmed the whole strong partnership thing that's been going on a while now between the U.S. and Thailand. He expressed his condolences for the flooding and offered support for flood management, even talked about sharing expertise and tech.
Okay, so it's a different tactic, isn't it? Less about grand gestures, more about targeted help. Like, they're really focusing on areas where the U.S. excels, disaster response, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And that difference really shows in what they want to cooperate on in the future. The U.S. is really pushing for investments in semiconductors, cybersecurity, AI sectors where they've got the upper hand.
It's a fascinating contrast, right? China's building things, high-speed rail, all that. They even suggested working on a satellite launch base for 6G, no less. Which, speaking of, adds a whole other layer of complexity here, doesn't it?
It does, because the United States, they've got a horse in the 6G race, too. So for Thailand to even consider partnering with China on something as sensitive as a 6G satellite launch base, it shows they might be willing to play both sides, maybe even use one superpower against the other.
That's a risky game, though. I mean, the U.S. isn't exactly known for sharing its best tech, especially when it comes to something as strategically important as 6G. Could backfire on Thailand? No.
Oh, for sure. And that brings us to the heart of it all. The challenges Thailand faces with this whole Neutrality Act, the risks and the rewards are very, very real.
Okay, let's talk about those potential pitfalls then. What happens when you try to be friends with everyone, especially when those friends aren't getting along themselves? What could go wrong?
Well, the biggest risk is obvious, right? Thailand gets caught in the crossfire. As tensions between the U.S. and China keep rising, it's going to get harder and harder for Thailand to avoid making tough choices that could really upset one side or the other.
So no more sitting on the fence.
Yeah.
Eventually, they'll have to pick a side.
It's definitely getting tougher to walk that line. Both the U.S. and China, they're going to put more and more pressure on Thailand. Pressure to pick a lane. That pressure could come in a lot of forms. Economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, even military posturing.
Sounds like Thailand's walking a geopolitical tightrope, blindfolded, while juggling chainsaws. If they lean too far towards China, they risk their relationship with the U.S. Their security arrangements, access to certain tech, all that goes out the window. But if they side too much with the U.S., that could mean economic retaliation from China, which, as we've been saying, is a vital trading partner.
You're exactly right. And here's the thing. This isn't just a Thailand problem. What they decide to do affects the entire Southeast Asian region.
So Thailand's choices could impact the whole region, not just them playing this balancing act on their own.
It's a regional domino effect, almost. Whatever Thailand does, it might influence how the rest of Southeast Asia reacts. Do they get pulled closer to the U.S. or China? Or can they manage to stay neutral as a region? That's a lot of weight on one country's shoulder.
No kidding. And on top of those external pressures, there's the internal stuff too, right?
Absolutely. Their own domestic politics, economic concerns, even public opinion. Those all factor into Thailand's decisions, finding that balance between what's happening at home and what those superpowers want. That's the tightrope walk.
This is giving me diplomatic anxiety just listening to it all.
Yeah.
Seriously, how does Thailand even start to navigate this? It's like they're juggling those chainsaws blindfolded on that tightrope. One wrong step.
Well, there's no easy answer, no magic formula. It takes constant reassessment, being ready to adapt because the geopolitical landscape changes by the minute, really, and understanding the consequences of their actions, both at home and internationally. It's a lot.
Exhausted just thinking about it. You'd have to be some kind of diplomatic ninja to handle all that.
True diplomatic mastery is definitely required. But at the end of the day, Thailand's success depends on using those relationships with the US and China to their advantage, to get ahead, to get what they need. It's finding that sweet spot where they benefit from both without being completely dependent on one, or worse, owing them big time.
Easier said than done, for sure. But they've been doing it for a while now, more or less. What do you think about Prime Minister Shinawatra's approach? Is she handling this okay so far?
It's early days, but she seems to get it, understands the challenges. This whole neutrality thing, engaging with both sides strategically, those are good signs. The real test will be when those pressure points inevitably pop up. And with how this rivalry's going, they will pop up.
Like what? Give me an example. What kind of pressure are we talking?
Okay, imagine China tells Thailand, hey, let us build a naval base on your coast. Or the US says, you're slapping sanctions on Chinese companies with us, or you're on your own. Those are just examples, obviously, but they show you the kind of stuff Thailand might have to deal with soon and how they react. That'll tell us everything.
Wow. Yeah, that really puts it into perspective. And this is all just going to get more complicated as the US and China go at it, isn't it?
Safe bet, yeah. But here's something to think about as we wrap up. What if Thailand's not just trying to survive this? What if they're aiming to lead?
Lead? You think they could actually use this to become, like, the example in Southeast Asia?
It's a possibility. Instead of being stuck in the middle, they become the bridge between superpowers, facilitating dialogue, pushing for stability. It's a long shot, sure, but fascinating to consider.
I like it. So maybe Thailand's not just dancing to someone else's music here. Maybe they're choreographing a whole new routine for the region to follow. Well, that's quite the image to end on. Thanks for this deep dive. Really got me thinking.
Anytime. It's an ever-changing situation, so definitely keep your eyes on this one, folks. Lots more to come.